Thomas Friedman would rather see Israel destroyed than Israel under Netanyahu. The Marxist left in our country would rather see America destroyed. Well, no rather, they just want to see America destroyed. This fraud Thomas Friedman, who writes for the New York Times, I think he's received like 4 Pulitzer Prizes. You know how you get a Pulitzer Prize, right? There's a committee that's set up of journalists who vote for themselves. And so this guy has created this aura around him because he's a leftist. Liberty and Tyranny, one of my earliest books, I quote him. And to paraphrase him, he was praising, he was slobbering over the communist Chinese government because he said, unlike in America, they make decisions about where they want to go and they get there. Well, you could say that about Mao, you could say that about Castro, you could have said about Hitler, you could have said about Emperor of Japan, you can say it about whomever you want. That's about the dumbest ass statement I've ever seen, and he said it, and then he doubled down on it. What's happening is the same Marxist left in our country pretty much exists in all European countries and in the state of Israel. They hate their own country. The case of Israel, the minority parties are actually going outside the country to the United States and to Europe to undermine the Netanyahu government, to undermine their own government. Here we call that treason. And they're trying to undermine their own government because the Netanyahu government wants to control that Supreme Court, not in any significant way, but wants to give power back to the people through the Knesset. So very, very modest reforms have been voted on, but that's not good enough. And so Thomas Friedman would rather see Israel destroyed than Israel under Netanyahu. The Marxist left in our country would rather see America destroyed. Well, no rather, they just want to see America destroyed. The media in Israel is even worse than in the United States. There really is very little counter media. There's a weekly newspaper, there's a channel that's sort of moderate, but that's it. There are efforts at podcasters, but pretty much the government controls the media. The government controls the media. I know this for a fact because I personally, my radio group, looked into trying to get this show on a radio station in Israel, even though it's in English, to no avail. Wasn't going to happen. Our podcast can be heard there, of course, but not the radio show. Because the left loves censorship. Because through censorship, they get to impose indoctrination. This fool, Thomas Friedman, works for a newspaper, the New York Times, as we've talked about here many times, which censored the Holocaust. To the extent it wrote at all about the Holocaust, it pushed it to the back pages. So this guy's a columnist for them. And he hates Netanyahu. He loves the radical left in Israel. When he was in Israel, he was part of the radical left as a young man. He has deceived the American people about who he really is and what he's done in his background. He married into enormous wealth. He lives in Bethesda, Maryland on a 7-acre home purchased by his wife. And he sits on his fat butt writing these pieces, called in by Biden to give him advice. And what they really hate is that Israel now is a powerful country that can defend itself and defeat its enemies. When Israel was a nascent country, when they were fighting for their survival, that was great. They loved Israel. But now that Israel has built itself into a truly remarkable little country, with enormous technological advances, embracing capitalism for the most part, rejecting socialism from the early founders of the country, building up a military. I mean, there's only like 7 million Jews there, 13 million people there, in the middle of nowhere. Now they hate it. So the terrorists, Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinians generally, they're the victims, you see. Go.
In an op-ed in the New York Times, columnist Thomas Friedman has issued a plea to both U.S. President Joe Biden and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, cautioning against pursuing a normalization deal with Israel. This warning comes amidst increased diplomatic efforts to broker a security agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia, reportedly including the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. In exchange, Israel would make symbolic gestures towards the Palestinians. Friedman accuses Netanyahu of attempting to win over the United States into an agreement that would not only curtail the power of Israel's Supreme Court, but also elevate him to a domestic hero status.
See. They like judicial oligarchies, that is Friedman, unless the judiciary isn't made up the way they want it made up. Like they would never call for a judicial oligarchy in the United States under the court's current makeup. In fact, they call about expanding the court, packing the court. They threaten the court, they intimidate the justices on the court. Their militia, the mob, is in front of their homes making noise because they didn't like a decision, a Dobbs decision or another decision. They viciously smear individual justices like Thomas, like Alito, like Gorsuch, even though Sotomayor is corrupt up to her eyeballs. So this is all result-oriented leftism. Go.
Controversially, Friedman suggests that Netanyahu's government resembles extremist hate groups and warns that the government is actively seeking alliances with far-right European parties with a history of anti-Semitism.
So Friedman is warning that Netanyahu is far-right, that he's making alliances with far-right. What he means by far-right is very religious parties. That's all. Nothing far-right about it. Friedman is a secularist. He's a self-hating Jew, in my opinion. So that's why he hates, this coalition government. Now, he doesn't have a problem when the prior government, in order to have a one-vote majority, one vote, made alliances with Arab parties that actually support the dissolution of Israel, even though they live there and are mouthpieces for Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and even Hezbollah. He has no problem with that whatsoever. But if these are particularly religious parties that are representing religious citizens in Israel, that's right-wing.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.